And what ordered pair is on your unit circle at pi? What's the ordered pair at pi? Negative 1, 0. Anybody disagree with that? Alright, this is a unit circle, so we're looking for tangent. Tangent is, no matter whether it's a unit circle or not, is y over x. So that would be my y value at that point, which would be 0, divided by my x value, which is negative 1. As long as 0 is in the top and you're divided by any number other than 0, your answer simplifies to be 0. You don't really have to have any work. These are your notes, so you're probably doing a little bit more work just so you can go back and figure out what you're doing. Cosecant of pi. So we got to think about the ordered pair of pi. We already know what that is. That's negative 1 comma 0. Now this is the hard part. We keep flip-flopping between right triangle trig and unit circle and circle trig. So this is circle trig right here. Okay? So cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. On a unit circle, sine is the y value. So the cosecant value would be 1 over y. Okay? So in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, I've got to forget about those right triangles because they've already gone back to a circle. So that would be 1 over what? What's the y value of that point? 0. 1 over 0 is undefined. Example 3. What is the ordered pair on the unit circle at 3 pi over 2? Three pi over 2. What's the ordered pair at 3 pi over 2? 0, negative 1. So what's the cosine value at 0, negative 1? Cosine is just the x. You can divide it by the radius if you want to, but this is a unit circle, so 0 divided by 1 would be, oh, we're just doing cosine. Cosine would be, cosine is x. So the answer would be just 0. Example 4, what's the ordered pair at pi over 2? 0 over 1. Tangent is y over x, so that would be what over what? 1 over 0, so the answer would be undefined. So I think what they're trying to show you here is if you have a quadrantal angle, that means an angle that lies on an axis. It lies on an axis. Pi and 3 pi over 2 and pi over 2 all lie, those angles all lie on an axis. Then your values are either going to be 0 or undefined. They're trying to show you that. Alright, next set of directions. Let theta be an angle in standard position. Name the quadrant in which theta lies. Let theta be an angle in standard position. Name the quadrant, that's quadrant 1, 2, 3, or 4, that theta lies. Alright, let's see what it's telling us. It says that sine is less than 0. That's telling us that our y value is negative. Okay, less than 0 means negative. Sine of theta, we're on a unit circle here, is y. So that's telling me that my y is negative. Cosine of theta being greater than 0, cosine is an x value, and it's greater than 0, so it's telling me that my x value is positive. So where would the point lie if the x value were positive and the y value were negative? Fourth quadrant. Alright, example 6. The tangent value is less than 0. So that means tangent is negative. So think with me for a minute. Tangent is y over x. So if tangent is negative, either the y is negative or the x is negative. So they're not telling me anything for sure in this first piece of information. All I know is that either y is negative or x is negative. So let's go to the next piece of information. It says that sine is less than 0. Sine is y, so they're saying that your y is negative. So I've got to go to that second piece first because that tells me for sure that y is negative. So then it means that if tangent is negative, less than 0, then what's x going to be? Positive x. So I actually had to do the second piece of information first, and then I had to go back, and that told me that x was positive. So somehow in your notes, you need to say, well, I had to do the sign value first. Then I could go back and figure that out. So if x is positive and y is negative, we are again in the fourth quadrant. Example 7. 7 says that cotangent is greater than 0. So cotangent is x over y. So if we're greater than 0, two things could happen. The x and the y could both be positive, or x and y could both be negative. So that's a either or. So go to the second piece of information. The second piece of information says the secant is less than 0. So it's telling you that secant is negative. Secant is 1 over what? 1 over x. So even though it's 1 over x, it's still saying that x is negative. Okay? Secant is attached to your x value. So if secant is negative, x is negative. And then we can go back to cotangent. If x is negative, then what do we know about y? It's negative also. So if x is negative and y is negative, what quadrant are we in? We're in the third quadrant. All right, questions about that little set of directions? You'll see some of those problems in your homework. All right, moving right along. Next set of directions say find the value of each of the remaining trig functions of theta. Find the value of each of the remaining trig functions of theta. All right, so they're giving me sine. So what I like to do is I like to say if they're giving me sine and it's 12 over 13. Let's think about this. Sine is a y value. But they're giving me a fraction for my y value. Is that any fraction of a y value on a unit circle that you have memorized? No. Okay? So what that means is that means they're giving you y over r. So that fraction, if it's not a y value that you have memorized from the unit circle, then this is not a unit circle problem. Okay? So what I like to do is I like to write down x is equal to, y is equal to, and r is equal to, because I've got to know all three of these values in order to work this problem. Okay? The radius is never negative. The radius of a circle is never negative. So if they tell you that the sine is negative 12 over 13, the bottom number has to always be your radius, and it will always be positive. So if your fraction's negative, the top part you need to think of it being negative because the bottom number is going to represent the radius. So that means the y value is negative 12. So in order to find the other trig functions, cosine, tan, all those other ones, I got to know what the x value is. So what do you think this piece of the information is telling you? It's telling you that if we're in the third quadrant, then x has to be negative. So we're going to do the Pythagorean theorem real quick. We're going to find our x value. We're going to make it negative. This is telling you that x is negative. Pythagorean theorem is not going to tell you whether your x is positive or negative. You're going to have to read some type of clue that's in your problem. So we're solving for x, so we have x squared. Hopefully you can do negative 12 squared in your head. That's 44. R squared is 169. So x squared would equal 169 minus 144, which is 25. X would be equal to 5, but we're in the third quadrant. So that means 5 has to be negative. Alright, so bam, we got our x, we got our y, we got our r. We got to find all the other trig functions. And again, I like to go in a specific order. They have sine. I like to write it down again. So they're saying sine of theta is equal to negative 12 over 13. And then I just go in order. Cosine of theta would be equal to x over r. So that would be negative 5 over 13. Tangent of theta would be y over x. My bad. What's y over x going to be equal to? And a negative divided by negative is a positive. So tangent's going to be positive 12/5. And then I'm going to do cosecant. And I'm just going to use my reciprocal identities. So cosecant's going to be negative 13/12. Secant's going to be negative 13/5. And cotangent is going to be positive 5/12. All right, and again, they're really just asking you for the other trig functions, so they're really just wanting those. I just like to have everything lined up so I can use my reciprocal identities. All right, questions about example 8. All right, moving on. Example 9 says that cosine is 4/5. So again, we know we're going to have to find x and y and r. So we can just start filling in what we know. If cosine is 4/5, cosine is x over r. So it's telling me that my x is 4 and my r is 5. If I'm in the first quadrant, x and y are both positive. That's what that's telling you. And so, what do I not know? I don't know y. So I'm going to use x squared plus y squared equals r squared to find my y. And I do know that y is positive. So that's going to be 16 plus y squared equals 25. Y squared equals 9. And y would then be equal to 3. And 3 is positive. So then they want you to find all the other trig functions. So sine of theta would be what? Which would be 3/5. Cosine they told you, but I'm going to write it down just so I have everything. Cosine is 4/5. Tangent would be 3/4 y over x. And then you can use your reciprocal identity. So cosecant would be 5/3. Secant would be 5/4, and cotangent would be 4/3. All right, I've taught you the concepts of this is 70% of section 4.4. This is what you're doing in 4.4. The problems do get a little bit harder, so we got a few more to practice. Any questions about example 9? All right, 10 says that cosine is negative 1/3. So remember, cosine is what over what? X over r. And r cannot be negative. Okay, so if cosine is negative 1/3 and r cannot be negative, then what's the x value? The x value would have to be -1 because the r value has to be positive. Does that make sense to everybody? If cosine is negative 1/3, the x has to be the negative value because the r value always has to be positive. All right, what are they telling me if theta is between 90 degrees and 180 degrees? I'm in the second quadrant. And if I'm in the second quadrant, x is negative and y is positive. So if they didn't tell you that, you wouldn't be able to work the whole entire problem out. So if you're theta and you're between 90 and 180, you're in the second quadrant. That means that the x value at your point of rotation is negative and your y value is positive. All right, so now we got to find y. So we're going to do x squared plus y squared equals r squared. And that means 1 plus y squared equals 9. That means y squared is equal to what? 8. That means y is equal to the square root of 8. Can we leave an 8 underneath the square root and call it simplified? No, we have to break 8 down into 4 times 2. Take the square root of the 4. So our y would simplify out to be 2 square root of 2. Ugly square root. Just going to make everything else a little bit harder. So is your y value positive or negative? It's got to be positive because your angle of rotation is in the second quadrant. So y value is 2 square root of 2. So we just got to get through the information. So again, I like to just do all 6. You don't have to. They're asking you to find all the other ones. I like to do all 6 because I'm just like that. I'm OCD. I like everything to line up. So sine of theta is going to be y over r. So sine is going to be 2 square root of 2 over 3. That's simplified. I don't have to rationalize. Cosine of theta, even though they gave it to me, I'm just going to do it. Cosine of theta is x over r. That's a little check. So that's going to be negative 1/3. If you don't get the same cosine that they gave you, something is wrong. Tangent of theta is y over x. So that's going to be 2 square root of 2 divided by negative 1. I can do that in my head. That's just going to be negative 2 square root of 2. Tangent is y divided by x. Alright, and then I'm just going to use my reciprocal identities to find the last 3 trig functions. So cosecant is going to be 3 over 2 square root of 2. I'm going to have to rationalize. That's going to give me what? 3 square root of 2 over 4. Good. Secant will be easier. Secant will be what? Just negative 3. And cotangent will be a little bit harder. Cotangent will be 1 over negative 2 square root of 2. And you will have to rationalize there. And that will give you negative what?